I'm just going to go through some basic housekeeping items as we get started here. And again, just please continue to add your names and affiliation to the chat as I run through just these general information. Before I get started, I do want to say thank you and welcome to everyone who's here today on this beautiful Monday morning, volunteering your time to participate in our new mix program project advisory committee. This is the PAC 3C. So we are continuing the series of milestone 3 meetings. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. So if you do choose to use your camera and turn it on, we will consider that as your consent for using your likeness in this recording. I will go through attendance. There are a few, or just one person joining from telephone, and I'll get to you in a moment because I know that you may not have access to a laptop to insert your name. As this is virtual, I'll just ask that everyone remains muted until the conversational portion of the presentation begins. And as usual, we are using Zoom and we have many features that we are able to use within our reactions pane. So you can raise your hands for questions at any times and for times where I'll ask for your interactions. And then again, the chat will be available throughout the presentation where you can insert any questions or comments or input, perspective. And if it's a question, we'll get to it when we get to a good stopping point. The speakers today will be myself and our Deputy Project Manager, David Schweitzer. And now that I've gone through my spiel, I'll just ask for the name of the person on the telephone with the 4 digits 7479.
Oh, yes, that's me, Martin Spring Waterville Community Club. I just want to let you know I'm happy to be here. Wish everybody a happy Memorial Day coming up, a safe one. I can only stay for 1 hour because I have to get to work by about 11:15, 11:20 to let you know, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you, Martin. Hopefully
Welcome.
We can get to some good information and get your perspective within your available time. So, all right. I'm going to get started here. This is today's agenda. We have gone through this and I sent this over to you all. Today we will have a discussion on the universe of alternatives, getting any questions or input that anyone may have regarding the packet of the alternates that we sent over at the conclusion of our last meeting. After that, we will go through the level 1 screening criteria and the evaluation criteria. And then we will go through the next steps in the process. And again, I just want to mention that you can add your comments, provide an input and ask questions. There will be opportunities to do so throughout this presentation. So feel free to participate and raise your hand or insert your question in the chat. And we will get to it. Either myself or one of the chat monitors will be alerted, and we'll get to that and address that when we get to a good stopping point. And let's get to it. So at the last meeting, we presented the remaining alternatives in our universe of alternatives. We discussed that there were 4 groups of the alternatives that we have defined, and those groups collectively make up that universe. Our last 2 meetings, we've gone through the no build alternative, we've gone through the alternate travel modes, we've gone through the rehabilitation alternatives, and then at the last meeting, we've gone through the replacement alternatives. Together, those are 23 alternatives that we have identified for the universe. There are a lot with a ton of information, and we sent over those packets, and we understand that there's a lot of information in those packets as well. So today we just really wanted just to have a discussion, listen to any concerns you may have or any ideas as well, and to see what your general consensus is on the universe that we have gone through. So on your screen is the list of the 23 alternatives that we have gone through. And the project team, we have come up with some general questions to ask if there are no immediate questions that have come up. And I'll just take a second to pause here to open the floor to anyone if there's a specific alternative that you'd like for us to explain or go through. We can jump to that alternative and explain that a little bit more, or I can go through the prepared questions that the team has put together. So I'll take a second to pause here, wait to see if there's any hands raised or questions in the chat. And I do want to mention that as the PEL study progresses, we will go through each of these alternatives in more detail, mostly when these alternatives are being dismissed. So we will be explaining the reasonings for why they were not moved forward, those aspects or features that may not have been supportive to the overall goal of improving the mixed master interchange. And so if we don't get to it all today, there will be more opportunities where we can provide more information on those specific alternatives. So I'm not seeing any questions yet. And what the team and we've met, and what we'll do first is we'll go through an example alternate. Oops, that's not where I wanted to go. We'll go to an example alternate and run through that together. David will provide that introduction to that alternate, and we'll start with we'll pull out this modern crossover interchange. This is alternate 18. And this alternate is an alternate that closely resembles the interchange and how it exists today, with some improvements. And I'll hand it over to David for him to give an explanation. And if there are any questions that come up from this discussion, feel free to add it to the chat or raise your hand, and we'll be able to get to that. But David, I'll hand it over to you to explain this first alternate.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. All right, so this interchange, as Naomi said, it's very similar to the existing that is out there. It is a full system interchange. When we do go through these different alternates, what we're going to do is we're going to hit the main lines first. Then we'll get to talking about the system ramps and connections. And then we'll talk about the local connectivity, which is the service interchanges and the frontage roads or any other local improvements that are proposed for that. So as we go through this, a few things you'll notice, it's going to be a full system interchange. We're going to look to get all the entrances and the exits onto the right-hand side, and then we'll look to improve frontage roads. So if we go in right now over to the map, we'll start with the main lines. And you'll see that I-84 is unstacked and built to the south of the existing. You'll also see that Route 8 is unstacked, and to the south of 84, it is built on the east side of the Naugatuck River. And then as it crosses under I-84, it gets back to the west side of the river. Our system movements are all direct connects, and they are the crossover style, what we had talked about in the previous PAC meeting, meaning we want them to be right-hand exits and right-hand entrances. So in order to accomplish this, they need to cross over or cross under the main lines in order to achieve this. And then if we look at the service ramps and interchanges and also the local connectivity, we'll start first along actually, the important thing on this is, and you'll find this with a lot of the alternates, we're looking to improve that interchange spacing. So there are modifications to the local interchanges, and this will really affect most of the people on this call because you're used to getting on and off of certain exits in getting around town. So if we start first with Route 8, one thing we did was we took the northern half of the route, the exit 30 interchange, the northern half there, which comes right up down there near Bank and Washington. And we brought that further to the south to match up with the southern half of the existing exit 30 interchange, which is down near 7th Street and Charles Street. And then the other improvement we made along the Route 8 with the service interchanges is we still included exit 32 there at Freight Street, and this is at more of a what we call a peanut roundabout interchange. It was very important to be able to maintain this connectivity to the city off of Route 8. Along 84, some of the things that we looked to improve was, first off, on the west side, we looked to move exit 18. We looked to move that further to the west so that we get proper spacing between the existing exit 17 and then where the system movements would come in at the core of the interchange. And then continuing easterly, we'll get to the far end then at exit 23. We look to move this to the east and get rid of the CD road all the way out on the east side there. Okay. And as far as exits 21 and 22, we wanted to remove them from right within the core of the interchange where we have all those tight interchanges. So there's a lot of weaving, diverges, and merges. We want to move them out onto the perimeter so that we'd exit the city traffic and enter it on the perimeter. What we wanted to do was include some frontage roads to be able to help this traffic move throughout the city. Now, I know we've talked about the frontage roads before, and along Route 8, there are existing frontage roads, so these we would just look to improve. But along 84 in the east-west direction, there are not frontage roads in these locations. So really what we're looking to do is improve that local traffic flow and get these people off of the interchange. And this is between the Naugatuck River and pretty much all the way out to the east, but primarily to South Main Street. And one other additional characteristic with this alternate is we look to get a 5th crossing of the Naugatuck River at the local level. And this is going to be a bridge that's going to be opposite Sunnyside Avenue, tucked in underneath the core of the interchange, heading to the north there. And then we're going to be tying in, so we get this connectivity between Naugatuck River and Meadow Street, tie in with the Freight Street District and with Jackson Street. So that is kind of a quick overview of this modern crossover interchange at a high level. And this is what we'll be going through with these other alternates. We're very glad to answer any questions you have that pop up with this alternate or with any other alternates that you have at this time. And again, this is just one alternate that we've gone through, and that these are components of the alternate, and these components, you'll see them carried on through other alternates within the package. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Naomi.
Thank you, David. Yeah, we do want to take another second to see if there are any additional questions on the alternates, even the specific one we've gone over, especially for those of you who have had the chance to look through the packet that we sent. If there are any questions or concerns, Mark, I see that you've unmuted, so the floor is yours.
Oh, okay. Just a quick question on that alternative. You talked
Sure,
about using the frontage roads that exist along Route 8, you know, from what'd you say? I think exit 31, is it? Yeah. I mean, you're talking about, you know, South Leonard, because, and again, I think the problem is the existing roads that sort of frontage are going through pretty active neighborhoods. You know, South Leonard goes through some commercial areas that have some, you know, businesses. And I mean, that's sort of the problem with the detours that we're sort of facing now. You know, you come up South Leonard and you got stop signs, you got, you know, heavy trucks, you know, with loading docks and things like that sort of interfere, low rail bridge, things like that, you know. And on the heading southbound to access Route 8, you know, farther down, you're going through a residential neighborhood and it's kind of tight and, you know, things like that. So when you talk about, you know, providing a frontage road along Route 8 and improving that, I mean, how extensive are you talking about the renovations being or rehabilitation being?
Well, I mean, Mark, we're at the preliminary planning stage. But your comment is well noted that, we do have to take all these factors into consideration. But, being able to pull these people away from the core of the interchange and not having to take additional space for new interchanges is something that we're looking at this stage. Now, again, that may change the further we get into it. If we're not able to improve these frontage roads, then we'll have to look for different alternates. But right now, I know it's not a full answer on probably what you're looking for, but it is something that the team is aware of and that we're taking into consideration.
No, and again, I just look, knowing the development that's, along both the South Leonard and, and I apologize, I forget the name of the road that goes along the
Charles Street, I believe.
Yeah, that could be, yes. Along the west side of Route 8 heading south. There's just not, it's fully developed. So that's the, you sort of look at it and it's like, okay, if you're going to widen this, create a real frontage road, a lot of the businesses and homes along there are going to have to be taken. I just don't know if that becomes a fatal flaw in the in that concept. So just a point.
Understood and well noted. We'd look to avoid taking properties. We want to enhance these properties and provide the better access. That would be our goal, not
right.
to take them. So.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Hi, Naomi. I have a comment and question, if I may.
Yes, Martin.
First of all, I think Riverside Cemetery would sign up for this right now, if this is where it goes. Moving Route 8 to the east of the river in front of our property would be ideal for us. I guess my question is, and maybe this was said, and I apologize if I missed this, is Route 8 opposite Riverside Cemetery under this alternative a surface road, or is it an elevated road?
You're talking the mainline Route 8 that's on the east side?
That's right.
We would be, I believe we're showing right around, if we're going to be up a level, pretty close to where southbound is today. We'd be at approximately that level.
Okay, and would it be stacked or side by side?
They're unstacked, so they'd be side by side.
Okay, that's great. And this is where the greenway, I think, is planned for on that side of the river. So would the greenway be closer to the river or further east of the highway? I guess the river, right?
One thing we've been looking at with that greenway is then possibly being able to move it to the west side, and to get more of, a linear path along the west side, so it'd be mirroring along Riverside.
Well, I'd sign up for that today as well. If you put the greenway across the street from our entrance, that would be ideal for us as well. So these are things I'm happy to hear. Okay, I think that was my comment and question. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I do want to mention that these are just features of one alternate, and these can be added or considered. If we call them complementary, they can be added to other alternates as well. And there are other things that we must take into consideration, such as the Naugatuck River Greenway, and we're hoping to incorporate whatever alternate gets selected and have it be compatible or just developed with these plans that are planned from the city of Waterbury in mind. So thank you.
Can I ask? Oh, sorry. It's Dana Elm. I was wondering if you could go revisit what you had mentioned about the changes at exit 18. Could you review that once again?
Sure.
Sure. Before we go ahead, David, did you want to say something just on that thought before it gets dropped, or?
No,
Okay.
no, I was just going to alert you that there was a question in the chat.
In the chat, yes.
And
Julie, I did see that, and I will get to that definitely. It's a very great question. Dana, let's answer Dana's question first, and then I'll get to Julia's question in the chat.
Certainly. So existing interchange 18 is actually, it's a 5-legged interchange that exists today. That is a service interchange, but its spacing puts it very tight to the core of the interchange. And this leads to some problems both in the westbound and in the eastbound direction. You know, in the westbound direction, you have the system movement coming on from southbound, and the one from northbound actually comes in on the left-hand side. So it makes it very hard for vehicles to get across the 3 lanes to get off of exit 18. So going by what the spacing is, you know, in the guidelines that we designed to, we would look to move exit 18 and push that to the west. So then we're properly spaced from existing 17, and we'd get the proper spacing with our system movements. So then your signing, your merges, your weaves and diverges, you know, would have the proper spacing so the drivers can make their decisions. So where this actual location is we're looking at in the westbound direction, the exit and the entrance would be relocated in, yeah, right there. So it'd be off of Chase Parkway. And I believe that's opposite the, is that Naugatuck Valley Community College there?
Yes, that
Okay.
that was my question. I just wanted to see where that was going to.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
And then on the eastbound side, you know, we'd be coming in opposite Country Club Road, you know, and this is still in the very preliminary planning stages. So, you know, unfortunately, this is impacting some properties, and it's something that have to be looked at further. But this is giving us the proper spacing. So along the main lines, you know, we're getting better traffic operations and making it a safer condition. So that is just one component of this alternate that is being looked at.
Thank you.
yep, thank you, David. And yes, we are looking at relocating exit 18, and these aren't the final conditions. We are just looking at concepts right now and what may be feasible to improve what is currently out there. So thank you. So just taking a look at the chat and Julia's comment or in question, which is a really great one. Julia asks, what happens after all the alternatives are presented to the PAC, and when will the public have the opportunity to see these alternatives? So as I mentioned, the PAC is slightly ahead of the public. And so you all are kind of privy to all this new information and are helping us set up how we approach the public with our concepts and how we are approaching our PEL study. The public will have the opportunity to look at these alternatives as they are added to the website, which we are looking to do. Right now, our meeting with the public, which will go through the alternates much in a similar way that we did with you all, is in the early fall. So the public will have a chance to ask questions and see these alternates and these concepts as well. And they will be added to the website so where people can look at this information on their own time when they have the time to read through those items and the details that we have thus far. After these alternates are presented to you all today, and you have an opportunity to comment on our level 1 evaluation criteria, we will begin, the project team will begin to preliminarily screen out the alternatives. So we'll get into this in a little bit if we can continue the presentation once we kind of conclude this discussion on the universe of alternatives. I'll go through the level 1 screening process and what happens then. It will be preliminary because we do need to go to the public and get the public's input and participation and perspective. And we do have meetings with agencies as well, where they also have to provide input and perspective and participate. So we'll preliminarily do our first level of screening, and with every step of the way, The PAC will be able to provide their all of your comments and questions. The public will be able to provide their comments and questions, and agencies will be able to do the same thing. And nothing will be final until we go through that public process. So right now, everything's pretty much preliminary, and the public will get a chance to look at these at a later date once we get through our first public meeting, which is anticipated to be next month. So looking forward to that. So thank you for that question, Julia. Hopefully that answers that. And I will go back to our main alternate page to see if there are any alternates that anyone finds interesting, would like to know more about, read through the titles, and I'll take another second here to wait for comments and questions.
Naomi, this is Mark Nielsen again. I would just sort of, and this is sort of more a, I'm not speaking for the city on these, but I would just think that the alternatives of relocating I-84, you got the Washington Street bypass or the South City bypass, things like that. I would think they probably wouldn't be, an alternative that, the city would like, only because right now, I mean, the interchange has sort of disconnected the city into almost 4 quadrants, and adding in another interstate through the south part of the city would, disconnect the city even more so. So I would think that those may not be appropriate alternatives to think about. And similarly, like the Route 8 Boulevard, on one level, gee, that would make sense, just turn Route 8 into, but that you'd have, traffic light control. And I know it's like, the state's looking at, eliminating the traffic signals on Route 9 through Middletown, so it's just going in the opposite direction. So I just, from my perspective, those kinds of alternatives, I don't think are good ones.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you, Mark. And those are really good observations. And those are observations that we have made as a project team. And I do want to just state again that we are all these alternatives, we know that some of them aren't going to solve the issues that we see, and may not be favorable to the city. And all of that input and perspective is great as we go through our screening process and begin to eliminate those alternates that are considered to be unreasonable or fatally flawed. The disconnectivity and those, features and consequences that may occur if that's an alternate that could potentially move forward is something that we are looking at and want to evaluate to make sure that whatever, as we go through the screening process, whatever remains is something that's feasible and aligns with the goals of the Department of Transportation and the state, but as well as the city of Waterbury. So, as you go through the packet of alternates, you'll begin to read through some of the challenges that we have identified as a project team. So I really appreciate that perspective, because those are also items that we, looked at and saw on our own as well, but we do need to just go through the screening process in order to make that decision. And we need to kind of look at these not so favorable, potentially not so favorable concepts, just to make sure that we are doing our due diligence and finding a potential solution. So thank you. So before I move on, I do want to ask a few questions to the PAC, just to see if there are any additional concerns that we can go through and identify with the PAC members. Starting here, and David, I also want to get your perspectives as well of if there are any, aspects of an alternative or any aspects of all of these alternatives that you think that PAC members who have that packet link should kind of pay more attention to in order to, just look at, so that when we are asking for their feedback and they can look at those aspects and features and provide that perspective and input.
Oh, certainly. Do you want to ask your questions first, or do you want my perspective?
So let me ask your perspective first, and then the questions, we'll kind of tee up those questions after your perspective. Hopefully something will fall from the tree here.
Yeah, no, I really think as the design team went through and started laying out these alternates, I really think the biggest thing that jumped out to the whole design team was the existing interchange spacing and how these interchanges were laid out with the left-hand entrances and exits. I mean, this is really, it leads to a lot of issues with the weaves, the merges, and the diverges. It gets very confusing. So it's really not meeting driver expectations. So really one thing the design team looked at is getting this proper spacing to try to simplify this interchange. I mean, it's going to be complex no matter what we do, but the more we can simplify it and make it easier for drivers, not so much the commuters and the residents that use this all the time. It's for those that are coming through Connecticut from a regional perspective that really need to, have this meet what they're used to seeing elsewhere. To me and the design team, I thought that was the biggest thing really was on this interchange spacing. Keep the core, keep a full system interchange and keep that at the core, but really try to get the system or the service interchanges spread out a little bit further so that they're functional. But in doing that, then you really got to make sure that you're making that local connectivity so that we're really benefiting the city of Waterbury to make it easier to access both to and from the main lines. To me, that was the biggest takeaway during the design of these alternates.
Thank you, David. And I do a lot of those items as well coming from the perspective of the engineers and the project team. Those concerns were also reinforced by the feedback that we have gotten from the PAC so far. So just from our discussions and at these PAC meetings, we've heard that a lot of people are concerned about those left-hand entrances and exits. Just through driving through this, trying to get to downtown and driving on I-84, the weaves that we were talking about, it's dangerous, and people who use this roadway, they really do feel that way. So if there's any way that we can, improve that, I think is a really big plus, including, making those interchanges further spaced so that just driving through this area just feels a lot safer and is more clear as well. So with that in mind, I want to ask the PAC, what impacts concern you the most? Is there a particular alternative or an area of impact that you have a major concern with that you'd like to speak up about and just identify and provide that input today?
Naomi?
Yes.
If I may, I don't know if Dave mentioned a bunch of changes in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, will that increase or decrease or keep the same amount of levels that we presently have?
Arthur, what we're looking to do is we're looking to unstack the main lines and run them side by side. So in effect, all of Route 8 would be at the level of Route 8 southbound. So it'd be one level above the local network. And then I-84, we'd look to get at one level also. We want to unstack that and get that at one level. So we'd be at the level of existing I-84 westbound. So we'd be up, you know, above Route 8 with that. So we'd
Right.
a level. Now, with some of the ramps, you know, some of those may need to elevate and go over top of I-84, because we won't be able to fit all of them underneath. So, but for the most part, we'd be lower by one level.
Okay. Thank you. So in other words, what we're doing is we're looking at a wider path. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, we'd be looking at wider footprints
Mhm.
for each of the main lines. What is taking place is you'll find is that the maintenance and the upkeep on the stacked structures is, you know, gets real extensive, and it gets very involved as you look further down the road. That's why, you know, we're looking to get away from the stack type structures.
So with the wider path, does that mean property has to be secured?
Yes, yep. When we get closer to that stage, would there be more property impacts? Yes.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Naomi, I have a question for you.
Yes, I
If
can.
you're standing in front of our train station, looking to the left, that's south. The tracks run south along Meadow Street, just to the west of Meadow Street, under the Mixmaster, and then over a small area of Washington Avenue. Will this project compromise any of that rail line that's there now, or is that already accounted for, something taken into consideration already?
Ken, we have taken that into account with our design, and actually what we're looking at with these frontage roads that we're proposing to make those connections between the Naugatuck River and Meadow Street. Seeing the railroad is actually elevated as it gets close to Meadow. We would look to drop Meadow Street a little bit in elevation, and we would look to go under the existing railroad. We've actually done a feasibility study to see, you know, what type of bridges could be put in there so we can get the proper clearance to get our roadways underneath, knowing that we're still within a floodplain, so we have to maintain an elevation so our roadways stay above that. But that's one thing we've looked at, is the existing railroad and the impacts it would have to the train station there.
Okay, thank you. Just because I've not heard it mentioned at all in the previous meetings. I just wondered what was going on with it. Because they are upgrading the rail systems, adding another rail, I believe, to Waterbury. And I'm just wondering if that was taken into consideration.
Yeah, no, and then that's a very good question, Ken. I don't believe we have mentioned that throughout these PAC meetings.
Thank you.
Okay. So it doesn't appear that there are any additional questions. I'm going to move on and go conclude this section for now. Take a pause. If there are any questions that generate as we are going through the remaining part of this presentation, we'll go back before we conclude our discussion on the alternates. But I do want to get into our level 1 screening criteria and explain that a little bit more, as we have been getting some questions about what's going to happen next. And then once I go through that, I'll open the floor. I believe that we'll have additional time to continue a discussion on the universe of alternatives and any other questions or perspectives that you may have. But before I move on, I do want to launch a poll. And this poll is basically getting a general feeling from PAC members on any alternate that you would like to see visualized with more explanation or more graphics. And this is for our upcoming public meeting that is occurring in the early fall. So when we do present our alternates, we can come with additional information and graphics so that we can better explain and provide an explanation of an alternate that you as PAC members may find very interesting and compelling, and we can prepare for that in the future. The poll has 3 questions, and they just list out all 23 of these alternates, including the no-build alternate. And I'm just going to ask for you all to select 3 total of the list of the 3 questions. So you'll be able to put a little checkbox next to the alternate with the corresponding name that you'd like to have explained a little bit more and visualized. And I will launch that poll now. But this is just to get a general understanding of what we can provide more additional information on and visualization as well. Once you are done with your selection, make sure you hit the submit button so that it can be recorded and made note of for our future meetings. Right. So I see a lot of people starting to participate, which is great. I'm going to continue the presentation as you all decide which alternates you want to take a look at. And I'll have this poll going in the background as I continue this discussion so that you all have enough time to take a look and select which ones you want to see more of. Okay, so as this poll is going on, I'm going to continue and introduce our level 1 screening criteria. And this very familiar figure on the screen is our PEL process. It's how we are proposing to screen and find that solution to the mixed master interchange. So we are using our PEL, our Planning and Environmental Linkages study. And what we have put together as a team is we are going to take all of these alternatives that we have identified for the universe, put them into this funnel, and go through 3 levels of screening, with each level becoming more detailed, including more analysis. With each level, certain alternates will be dismissed, which means that they have been found to be unreasonable or fatally flawed. And that's ideal. That is very ideal, because at the end of the study, we really want to find something that we are calling the PEL recommendations, or our range of reasonable alternatives. We don't know what that will be quite yet. It could be 1 alternate or a handful of alternates. But what we really want to do through this process is just dismiss those ones that are unfeasible. Today, we will be focusing on our level 1 criteria, and I'll get into that in just a minute. So our level 1 screening is engineering based. It's a gut check, and we are really just asking the question, can this alternate satisfy the purpose of our project, and does it have any fatal flaws? It's very general. We are identifying and trying to dismiss those very, unreasonable alternates. We take a look at the purpose of our project, which I have generalized here with our 3 of the needs that we have identified, which have been our structural deficiencies, geometric deficiencies, and operational deficiencies. And our purpose of our project is to improve those conditions. The fatal flaws that we have identified are cost, feasibility, and additional ones are to be determined, and that is through coordination with our agencies, which is occurring in the future. At this level of screening, it's very general, just pass or fail. You either can move forward and go into the next screening level, or it will be dismissed and we will not look at it any further. So just to provide a little bit more detail, our level 1 process will occur kind of like this. We'll begin with our structural evaluation criteria and all of the universe of alternatives. All of those 20 alternatives will be looked at through this structural criteria. Then we'll look at the geometric criteria, and we will do the same thing with all of the alternates. We'll look at the operational criteria, the cost, and finally the feasibility. And all of the universe of alternatives, all of the alternatives that have been identified will be looked at through each of these 5 groupings, and those that are determined to pass will move forward, and those alternates will be called our initial alternatives. We will present to you those results, not only to you as PAC members, but also to the public at a public meeting. We'll also present these results to agencies as well to get everyone's input and perspective on the alternates that have been moved forward. Additionally, we will also go through the reasons why certain alternatives were unable to satisfy the purpose of the project and which fatal flaws have been identified for an alternate that has been dismissed. So I'd like to provide some additional information on what that screening criteria has been developed thus far for our level 1 screening. So beginning with structural, we want to improve those structural deficiencies that we have identified and gone through as a team. And what that means is we want the alternative to be able to address the need to improve or replace those deteriorating bridge structures that have outlived their original intended 50-year service lives. For the geometric, we are looking to improve those geometric deficiencies, and the alternative must have the ability to address and improve those deficiencies that do not meet the current design standards for the I-84 and Route 8, those main lines, those system ramps, and the service ramps. The operational criteria that we developed, which also means those traffic operations, we want to improve those operational conditions. And so the alternate should be able to provide system ramp connections directly between I-84 and Route 8 for those high volume movements and indirectly for those lower volume movements. And with that in mind, we also want to make sure that the alternate can provide adequate capacity based on the current and the future traffic forecasts on the main lines and the system ramps and the service ramps. When we get to the fatal flaws, we're beginning with cost and we're looking at practicability. With each alternative, we'll look at the order of magnitude of construction costs. We want to make sure that the state has the ability to make those financial resources available for that alternate. That will include capital construction costs and the contingency factor, which will account for the engineering and the mitigation costs. And I do want to mention that at this very initial high-level screening for level 1, the rights-of-way costs will not be included at this time. I understand that there's a lot of concern of acquisitions and those items, but at this point in time, since we're very high level, they're not going to be included at this level, but those considerations will be made at a subsequent level when we have additional information in more detail. And then finally, we have the feasibility criteria. And for that, we want the ability to implement the alternate or the alternative using proven technology, engineering and construction techniques, and just general constructability. Can this alternate be built? Is it feasible? Do we have the technology and the ability to do it? And that's really what we're looking at. And with that in mind, we want to be able to construct or reconstruct the interchange with the ability to allow those main lines and system ramps to continue to operate during construction, because we know we can't just shut down I-84 just to rebuild it. That is not feasible. So we want to make sure that the alternates or alternates that are determined or that can move through this level can be feasible in being implemented. So just to give a brief overview of what the screening process will look like is we'll take a look at each alternative, and this will be an example alternative. So if an alternative can pass the structural criteria and check in the geometric criteria, the operational criteria, and the cost, everything looks great, but we realize that the feasibility, it's infeasible to be able to construct this while maintaining traffic, or there's no way to build it. At this point in time, it would be considered a fail, and it would be dismissed from our screening. It would be considered a failure to satisfy our purpose and need, as it has a fatal flaw. It's infeasible to be able to be constructed, and therefore it will not move forward in our screening analysis. So with that in mind, I do want to identify this new-ish report that is on the website. It is a draft, it's a current draft, and it details our screening methodology. Right now, we just have the level 1 outline and detailed, as that's where we are at right now with our PEL study. It is on the website in the document library. We'd like to encourage you to take a look through it. It details every step of the way of how we are proposing to screen and evaluate each of the alternatives, with a general idea of what the future levels will be. We are focusing on the level 1, as we would like for you all to provide your input and comments on this high level gut check of criteria for our level 1 screening. Then I'll get to the next steps. So as we take a look at our PEL study steps, we are right now in our evaluate and screen alternatives phase here right now with the PAC. We will take into consideration whatever comments and questions and perspectives that you give, and look to refine our level 1 screening criteria if determined necessary, and begin to preliminarily screen and review the initial concepts that we have developed for the universe. And to give a general idea of where the PEL PAC members are, we have gone through milestones 1, 2, and 3. Our next meeting will go through our preliminary screening results and obtain those inputs. Right now, they will be preliminary, as we have not been able, or we will not go to the public ahead of your next meeting, as the public needs to be, the PAC will be 1 step ahead of the public. But you'll be able to see our preliminary results, and we'll be able to take into that your input and into consideration before we present the preliminary results to the public and agencies. These results will not become finalized until we get that input from the public and the agencies as well. And I just want to make sure that is clear, that nothing is final until we get that public input and perspective. And looking forward a little bit, today is the 23rd. And if you do have any comments or questions on a universe of alternatives as we prepare to begin our screening process, or even comments, we ask that you provide your comments by the 13th of June so that we have, time to incorporate as necessary and document into our PEL documents. If you have any questions or concerns on any certain alternates or the level 1 screening criteria, and so that is due on the 13th. You may email myself if you have any comments or questions, and we'll get to that and get back to you as quickly as possible. And just as a quick look ahead, we do have our public meeting coming up in June. So that will be virtual at this point in time. We are looking at ways to, for future public meetings, ways to have a hybrid option, but at this time it is virtual and via Zoom. We are anticipating the next PAC meeting to be in July. This will present our preliminary screening results and get your input. A lot of these schedules are in flux, and we are being flexible with where the public and the PAC is at this moment. So we are anticipating July, and as soon as we nail down that timeline, we will send out an invitation with additional information. And then, as I briefly mentioned, we do have an anticipated public meeting in the early fall. And that's where we will present the universe of alternatives to the public, as well as the level 1 screening criteria. So they'll essentially get a similar presentation to our milestone 3 and this presentation as well. And as we wrap up here, before the next meeting, just continue to review those materials that we've sent throughout this milestone, including the universe of alternatives and the level 1 screening criteria. Explore the program website as we upload alternatives to the website later earlier this fall. Those of you who are on that mailing list will get alerted, and just continue to look at the website, as that will be updated as more information comes. And then also please be on the lookout for additional emails from myself and other members of the project team as we continue to plan for our future meetings and scheduling of that sort. And we hope that you remain excited as we continue to refine our universe and continue to develop it, and are able to provide you all with more information on what we are looking for our new mix, whatever it ends up being. So with that, I will open it up to questions. You can ask questions about any of the material that we have gone through today. I will also, what I'm going to do is navigate to our general universe of alternatives page, just to see if there were any questions that anyone had on a certain alternative, or an alternative that you'd like to look at a little bit more. If a title kind of piqued your interest, if you want us to explain that, feel free to ask that now. It is 11, so we do have another 30 minutes. So we'll stay around to answer any questions that anyone may have. One of the questions that I have put together was if there was a preferred alternative by any of the PAC members. I heard from Martin, he said that he had a preferred one. Are there any other groups that have preferred alternative? And if you do, maybe you can explain why, and that would help us, take that input into consideration as we, continue to screen and develop these alternates. Any perspective is very helpful for our PEL study. Does anyone have an alternate that they feel is definitely a no in their book, something that was least preferred? Any perspective on that?
Oh, yeah, Martin Spring, Waterville.
Hi, Martin, yes.
Yeah, I have to get going. I got to go to work, but I did want to say this, and I appreciate your indulgence. I'm very concerned about over here for the travel modes. I'm concerned about on the Mixmaster, traveling back and forth as we do go from Naugatuck back to Waterbury and all around the various areas and up towards Thomaston. I'm very concerned about the safety on the highways and byways, not only for people traveling out of state, but us folks that live here in Waterbury, getting off the exits. And also I'm very much concerned about the workers, because when we're driving down the road and we see, people speeding so fast, I was just wondering, I mean, I feel bad because I wouldn't want to be a DOT worker out there like that. I mean, these people just have no mercy at all. I mean, doing 75, 80, 90 miles an hour and they're cutting in front of people in and out of traffic. Then you have the tractor trailers. I know this isn't part of our discussion, but this is another piece of the puzzle for the travel mode. And I just was wondering if you guys can get more police on the highways or something, or maybe put some signs up to tell people to slow down, because sometimes when we're driving, we're trying to get off an exit or an on-ramp or something, people don't slow down. They almost run you off the road. And I said, oh my God, this isn't the Indianapolis 500 here. I don't know what's the matter with people. So I think people should place a lot of emphasis on safety on the highways, because when I go back and forth to church up by Country Club Road, I see a lot of accidents on the way to church and on the way back. And I just saw one this past week. Somebody flipped the car right around and hit one of the Jersey barriers. And then they hold up all the traffic on top of it.
Thank you, Martin, for that perspective. And yes, we are definitely looking at ways that we can improve safety through our New Mix program and improve some of those aspects that may be contributing to some of the crash rate that we are experiencing as it currently exists in those areas. So increasing safety is a big one and a big item that we are taking into consideration, ways that we can reduce the crash rate through this area.
Okay, listen, I want to thank you for your time. I have to leave. I got to get to work, okay? And thank you for your time. I do appreciate it. All right.
Thank you, Martin.
Take care.
Martin, thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a great Memorial Day weekend, everybody.
Great, thank you. I see a question in the chat from Stephanie Valakis, and thank you for this question. Stephanie, it says, it is difficult to determine which alternative may or may not impact traffic to the hospital. Ultimately, any alternative that would negatively impact ambulance, patient, or colleague travel to St. Mary's Hospital would be an issue. Hoping the team will consider that.
Yeah, it's certainly not a question, but more of a concern. Just, it's hard to determine with these 23 alternatives, which will and will not impact. So just, broadly to keep it in mind.
No, and that is something, Stephanie, that the design team, it is high on our list, is access to the hospitals. Just so that we provide that good, timely, efficient access to both of them. So.
Great, thank you so much.
Stephanie, this is Neil Patel with the DOT. And if there's any other insight within obviously the operations, and if there are certain areas that the emergency personnel highlight, that would be of good importance to us in terms of trying to incorporate that, just so that we know maybe there's something that we don't see that they see at a certain intersection that hinders them. So yeah, any input you would have is welcome. Thanks.
Yes.
Sure, I can actually connect with our ambulance partners and see what they have, if they have any thoughts or recommendations, and get back to you.
Very good, thank you.
Excellent. Are there any other potential problems that anyone sees with any of the listed alternates, or anything that's not listed with the concepts that we have identified thus far? Hi, Julia, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. I just wanted to sort of reiterate what Stephanie said. I think, you guys have gone through so many alternatives that it can be challenging to understand the impacts that each would have. I would say probably for a lot of us. And so I don't know, as we go down this route and it starts to be narrowed down, if it'll be easier to understand the impacts of each. But I think it's just important to recognize that with 23 alternatives at a very high level, you know, it's challenging to understand all of the impacts that might happen.
Yes, absolutely. That is definitely, thank you, Julia. That's something that we have recognized, even myself as someone on the project team. It's hard to juggle 23 alternates and keep them, you know, clear in your head. So as we go through the screening process, we'll be able to identify those impacts that everyone's concerned with, not only through their own day-to-day travels, but, you know, the impacts that it may have to the neighborhoods and other areas. So those impacts will become clearer. We'll be able to speak to them more directly once we go through this screening process and begin to evaluate the alternatives using the screening criteria that we've developed. And with each level of screening, a document will be produced detailing our screening decisions, what has happened, the reason why certain alternates have moved forward and others have been dismissed. And you'll get a better idea and explanation of how we've come to those decisions and conclusions through our evaluation and analysis. So hoping to help clarify some of those lingering questions and also clarify those impacts as we continue to progress through our PEL study. So thank you.
Naomi, maybe you touched on this a little bit earlier, but maybe right now is a good time to give the PAC members an understanding of how they'll see these alternatives in future meetings, because like Julia is saying, there's 23 of them right now, and we went over them at a very high level. We gave a packet out. We expect that the number of alternatives in the running is going to narrow down significantly after the first level of screening, and it'll become more manageable, and all of you will be able to become more acquainted with the ones that remain. But that being said, we are still planning to go over each of them in a little bit more detail at future meetings. Is that correct, Naomi?
That is correct. We will go through at our future meetings, we will go through the alternates that have been dismissed, and we'll explain to you why they have been dismissed. We'll highlight some of those fatal flaws that we have identified and through the evaluation criteria and reasonings as to why they cannot be progressed forward with our evaluation criteria. We'll also give a little bit of an explanation of those alternatives that have moved forward. And as the study progresses, we'll be able to give more detail, and this 21 alternates will be narrowed down so that it is more manageable to explain and to look at in more detail, where it's not overwhelming, where we're talking about 23 alternatives at each meeting. So that's something that we are looking to do. That's something that will happen in the future. And as we progress through, this will become more manageable, and these 23 we believe will be narrowed down to a much more manageable collection of alternates as we continue to go through our screening process. Thank you, Chris.
Naomi, just reading on the second half of Stephanie's question there with the patient or colleague travel to St. Mary's Hospital. I think when we answered that, we, touched on how we were concerned that, the ambulances would have, the good emergency access there. But as far as your patient and colleague travel, that's where, when we take into consideration this interchange spacing, you get better signing so people understand, where they're traveling to. We get the right-hand entrances and exits, which then makes it easier for those people, whether if it's the people that go there an awful lot that work there at St. Mary's, or if they're a patient who go there hopefully very infrequently, but yet they're staying on the right side where it's going to be safer for them to get access to and from there. And then also the improved signing helps them find their direction a lot easier. So, that's just another consideration as we answer your question there.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, Leon, it's everyone. Scott Roberts is here too. But one more thing, just along the lines of what Neil was saying before, and maybe this might help some of your questions for you too. What Neil was saying back to Stephanie about the access to hospitals and getting more information from various users of the highway. Change. Again, want to stress that these are conceptual alternatives. So nothing that you see here is bound in stone. It's not designed. These are sketches on a plan that came up from a workshop that we put together and said no idea is a bad idea. So obviously these can be fine tuned. There's going to be nuances along the way that adjustments can be made. To accommodate additional information. And that's the purpose of these meetings here, is to get the input from, you as representatives of various groups and as well as the public. So I just want to, mention that and reiterate that these are concepts. And, this universe of alternatives that we're showing is in no way bound in stone. So even as we start to narrow them down, and take away the ones that, as Naomi has said, maybe have fatal flaws or infeasible for some reason or other. That's just narrowing it down to try to get to the best ones. We're trying to get the cream to float to the top here and get the best options that work for all purposes. As was mentioned, to meet the needs and demands of the Department of Transportation, of the City of Waterbury, of the end users of the highway. So, that's what we're hoping to do. That's what the final outcome of this should be.
Thank you, Scott. Yes.
Naomi, if I can follow up question to Scott's comments. So how do we as stakeholders, the community, citizens, residents, stay engaged after the PEL study, after your public meetings, after we've discussed all alternatives? So in other words, as Scott says, there'll be time for fine tuning these plans. I think that's where I think it's most important for people in the community to be engaged and involved when now you're building sidewalks and crosswalks and things that really, kind of impact us on our day-to-day lives. So how do we stay connected to this process down the road, going forward after the PEL study?
Mm-hmm. So the project website will continue to be up as we go through and enter into our NEPA phase, our National Environmental Policy Act phase. Right now, we are anticipating that we'll have a handful of alternatives, perhaps more than one, and those will go through the NEPA process where that will be defined even further than what we have at the conclusion of our PEL study. The NEPA process has a very similar public involvement phase. At this point in time, we're not exactly sure what it will look like, but we will definitely have public meetings where we will be able to go through those particular, at that point in time, they might be called design options rather than concept alternatives. But we'll be able to go through those design options to identify a preferred alternative and get input on whatever that preferred alternative will be. There will be public meetings, there will be information on the project website. It will look similar to where we are now, but with a lot more detail, a lot more information, a lot more variables will be narrowed down so that it can be more directed and with a smaller group of reasonable alternatives. So there will be a public option in the public ability to continue to provide input and comments and through that NEPA process that will occur immediately after this PEL study is
Okay,
complete.
thank you. I guess it sounds more informal rather than us being a PAC. But there'll still be opportunity.
Right, yeah. At this point in time, we're not sure if there will be a PAC, but there could be a PAC for the NEPA process if that is what is necessary. We won't know until the PEL study is over and what options, kind of are remaining at the end of this. So if the department determines that a PAC is, still necessary, there will be a new mixed PAC for the NEPA. But at this point in time, we don't know.
Okay, thank you. I think speaking for Riverside Cemetery, we hope to be involved and as helpful as we can through the entire process.
Thank you.
Well, and keeping in mind too, just to add to that, and further answer your question, Martin, as projects go into design too, there'll be opportunity for public comment in design. So the process is always open. It's not, we're not going to be doing anything behind closed curtains. Okay. So I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, as we begin to wrap up our discussion here, I do want to also throw out that we are also looking to get input on if any members of our PAC and members of the public have their own solutions that they've come up with. At this point in time, everything's on the table. We are looking at, anything that could potentially improve the mixed master and how it functions today so that we have a solution in the future. So as you continue to look through the packet of alternates and as we continue to develop this PEL process and develop these concepts with more detail, we do want to, get input from anyone on if they have any solutions, any concerns, any impacts. Everything at this point is on the table, and we are looking for feedback and perspective because anything at this point in time will be helpful as we continue through our PEL study.
One observation from me, Naomi. So we had really good discussion today on the alternatives. The second part of this presentation on the criteria for screening the universe down, that was part of the presentation, but we didn't have much discussion or feedback on that. So I think that we'll probably interpret that as that everyone more or less understood what the purpose was of that first round of screening and how we would make decisions for alternatives that wouldn't be studied further in the future for this study. That being said, if anybody does have questions on that come up later, or it becomes apparent during our next PAC meeting when we're starting to present those initial preliminary screening decisions, that maybe there was something more to understand, we could talk about it within the interim or address it at that next meeting. But I did kind of just want to draw more attention to it because the plan is at the next PAC meeting, we come back and we say, we evaluated those 23 alternatives and here's a number of them that we don't believe should advance on for further study. So
Thank you, Chris. Yes, that's great to note, because we are looking for that perspective and input from members of the PAC on this screening criteria as well, because we will be preliminarily screening out alternatives after we get your initial input on this evaluation criteria at this first level, understanding that there will be 2 additional levels of screening after this level, but it is important that we get any perspective or input and feedback on this screening criteria. And again, we have that alternative screening methodology draft report on the website where you can look in detail on our screening criteria in more detail than how it was presented today, and get those comments to us and questions to us by the 13th, and we can document it and incorporate it into our PEL study documents. And if we feel it's necessary, also include it in our level 1 screening criteria. And if it's not pertinent to level 1, that could be included in our subsequent levels as well. So just keep that in mind as you go through our PEL study documents and those documents in the document library.
There's a question in the chat there, Naomi.
Okay, thank you. So when an alternate, this is from Brian Peterson. So when an alternative is failed, might there be any element of it salvageable? That's a really great question, Brian. And that's something that we did touch upon. There could be complementary features in a particular alternative that may be still feasible to incorporate and add to another alternate if it's determined that that feature is not is feasible and reasonable and can be incorporated into that that alternative. There are features that are connected with other features, and therefore they may not be able to be incorporated into another alternate, and that would not be considered a complementary feature. But at this point in time, you are correct. There could be an element of an alternate that could be feasible and added to another alternate if determined feasible. And at our next meeting, we will go through those fatal flaws or unreasonable features that must be screened out and will be preliminary screened out at the level 1 screening. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, and I'll wait if there are any additional questions that come to mind. And again, this is not the end all be all, and all of these concepts are conceptual and at this point in time, so they're not set in stone. So if anything comes up, any additional questions or an idea or a feature and an aspect comes up, feel free to shoot myself an email or anyone on the project team an email asking that question. We'll get back to it as quickly as possible. We can also incorporate those questions and comments. They will be documented into our PEL study as well. Okay, and just as a quick reminder, there is the poll still going. So before I close it down, please hit submit on those questions or on those options and alternatives that you'd like to see with more detail or visualization. Feel free to participate in that poll, but as soon as we close down this meeting, it will be closed for this meeting, and we'll take it into consideration for our public meeting in the early fall. Okay. Okay. All right, so the time is 11:28. I think we had a really great discussion today, and I appreciate all of the input and perspective that we received today from our PAC members. And again, feel free to send me an email, or anyone on the project team an email with any questions or comments that you may have that will be documented into our PEL study. We are looking forward to meeting and seeing you all at the public meeting that's coming up next month, and then also at our next PAC meeting, which we will send out that information as soon as we've identified the best meeting time for July. And again, thank you all for joining us today on your volunteer time. And as always, it's been a really good conversation. So thank you and take care. Have a great rest of your week, and happy Memorial Day as well.
Same to you. Thank you.
You too.